Day 2 kicks off with Module 3, Development. This replaces both the Building Blocks module as well as the Development module that we had in the Kingston release. It focuses on configuring, maintaining, and extending ServiceNow capabilities using our platform customization capabilities and our building blocks. However, before we ever put fingers to keyboard to configure applications or modify or extend anything in the platform, we have to make sure first that it's the right thing to do and that we understand the responsibility of maintaining that over time. So we've got our demands for development, architecture and governance, the importance of that, system quality attributes. This is all stuff that we had in the previous release, resources for establishing good governance frameworks, as well as our pyramid to understand the risks of each type of customization. One thing I wanted to point out with this, of course, the pyramid is not comprehensive. We can do a lot more types of customization than just those that we see here. However, I did an exercise looking at upgraded instances. And as you know, the skipped upgrades log has gotten pretty out of hand. Well, in London, they tried to kind of rein in the monster here, and they prioritized skipped upgrades according to the risk of skipping those upgrades. When I did an exercise to look at the priorities of skipped upgrades versus what I had in this pyramid, there was almost a direct correlation here too. So from an upgrade perspective, the higher up you are in this pyramid, the higher the risk is for upgradability. Then we get into solution design. We've got our solution design checklist that we have borrowed from Application Development Fundamentals. Feel free to insert a plug for that course in here. I think I've attributed this checklist to that course. Bring students into Studio. You can have them create a sample application or just test with starting from scratch. They're going to need to be in there for the quiz that we have next. And then show them create application file. Again, we've been stressing that the platform is extensive. There are a number of tools and building blocks that we can use to extend and configure ServiceNow and as a platform. How do we know all of those building blocks available? The best place to go, in my opinion, is looking at Studio. I think that the developers have done a fantastic job of organizing all the building blocks according to what you need to do. So our next activity that we have is the building blocks quiz. It's essentially, I think, about 10 different questions where we give the definition that's over here on the right and ask what type of building block that describes. So show students that, show them that, and encourage them to kind of peruse through what's available in there. You may also want to show them how they can elevate their privileges to security admin and show them how the additional items show up in access controls as well. That's going to be very important for them to know down the line. So then we get to the quiz that's assigned to them in their instance. I've got instructions for accessing that here. And what we're trying to do is teach them how to go to Studio to fish, to understand what building blocks they can use to satisfy requirements, as well as highlight some of the more common ones that we use on a daily basis. So that should be a fairly quick thing. I have improved the report that shows up after the quiz is complete so they can easily see what they got right, what they got wrong, and know what the correct answer should be. We follow that up with some kind of just motherhood and apple pie solution design guidelines, as well as a plug for technical best practices. One thing that you may note is missing from this course is any reference to HealthScan. HealthScan is a new service that's available right now only to ServiceNow professional services that uses about 185 different definitions to assess the maintainability, upgradability, and compliance with technical best practices, either as an instance as a whole, or we have something that we also call sprint scan. So as developers are developing, we can kind of make sure that we're tracking to best practices. That was not ready for prime time when this course was published, and I was counseled to not mention it in this course. I do, however, have in the knowledge base on the platform implementation instance an article with some reference information where uh, customers, partners, and employees can get a little bit more information from Martin Wood through a YouTube video. Next topic in development is application scopes, i.e. our holy war. This always has gotten fairly contentious. We go through the brief history that we had in the previous release, philosophy, and then our scoped versus global. I've simplified this quite a bit in here, hopefully. Hopefully you like this a little bit better. There have been some new advancements in the London release for scoped app support. We also can do global scoped apps, which seems like it's oxymoronic, but it does make sense. And I do have that working in student mini implementation instances. So here we go with our comparison of scoped apps versus global apps. Scoped apps, we've got a separate namespace. Global apps, everything's in global. You don't know what belongs to what. Until London, where we can have we can identify components of global apps a little bit better. Delegated development, we can do only in scoped apps. We can't do that in global. Source control integration, again, that's just scoped apps, not global. We can, however, publish to app repos. This was not initially working in the mini implementation instances, but we went back to the development and got that working. So you can publish a global app to your company's app repository and deploy that out to other instances in your stack. You cannot deploy a global app to the store, though. That's still an absolute no-no. But since we can see start from global apps in Studio, we've got some good easy file management there. Kind of sum that up with the general rule of using scoped apps wherever possible. And then we've got some examples and exceptions there. We've got our scenarios to discuss of whether or not we'd go scoped, global, or more discussion needed in here. I know you guys love this. You don't have to go through all of them, but please make sure that you kind of practice on this. One thing to note here, if you see a number that ends with even, I'm saying that's going to be scope. So that's your clue before you click to progress through what I'm going to say. Triple numbers at the end, to me, that's my little hint that there's going to be discussion needed on that. And then odd here, for example, implement a workaround provided by high support in advance of a patch. Like, we're going to fix this, but here's a temporary fix. So when you upgrade, it'll overwrite. If high tells you to do it in global, do it in global. So we've got some scenarios to discuss. We then get into our lab preview. So the lab that we have coming up, which is now Lab 301 to build our HHD app, is based on these diagrams. So we want to really talk to students about pictures being worth 1,000 words, okay? I know maybe this is skipped over in a lot of classes, but what can you tell from a requirement standpoint by looking at this wireframe? Here, we've got our menu. We know what order the module should be in. We know the menu name. We know what the module should be named. We know for my request what the filter should be. It's a list view. Here are the fields that we should have exposed in the list view. That's a lot of information that we can pack right into this one picture. And then here we can look at request prototype and we see the form view. We can even guess at some of the field types as well. Our use case diagrams here, these are our roles that we need to define. We see our inheritance, that the user role the admin should be able to do everything the user can do. System admin should be able to do everything that the HHD admin can do. And then here's what functionality we need to allow each role to do. So that talks to our permissions, and we can see some of the constraints in here. The user can view a prototype request if they are the requester. For the class diagram, we see what fields we need to define on the table and also what operations we'll be able to do as a result of that. Some of these operations speak to later releases. Actually, we've got labs that we'll put into the integrations class that's being written to facilitate some of that. And that brings us to our HHD application right around lunchtime. Then we get into our code search. And these are just like little development tools. It's only a couple to hit on, but they can be very, very useful. Our code search within our studio environment, script debugger, when that works, how useful that is. And then we've got also a tiny URL where we can gather additional ones to highlight here. Once we've built our app and we know some of the tools available, then we talk about application deployment and management. We touch very briefly on delegated development. We do have a lab where we set this up and get a little bit of hands-on with that. We talk about our app repo versus the store and how that works in general. Applications, the interface for this has changed quite a bit in the London release. So you can see what's in development, not installed, installed in there. Deployment options via the app repo versus update set, when you should use each one of those, and then some guidelines to use with update sets. We finally get into a fairly quick lab, just about 10 minutes, to add delegated developer to the HHD app and require the Flow Designer plugin in order to install the HHD app. So that's it for the development module. We do have a number of resources to further learning, including reviewing governance resources and champion enablement, some courses in the developer portal, review the technical best practices, search for system update sets, application sharing in docs to read some of the documentation, and consider going to the application development fundamentals class.